Have you ever wanted to truly, emotionally, and physically connect with somebody? Whether you're in a relationship or you'd like to be in a relationship, this is something that's really incredible to be able to achieve. And this is what Erwan and Alicia Davon are doing. And they've got their own practice. They've got their own whole world wrapped around empowering people to discover the best of themselves and each other. We are in for an incredible journey, and you are going to be a part of it. You get to see, literally you can see it in their eyes, the way they connect. And this is Alicia and Erwan Davon on the Disco Posse Podcast. All right, you're here. This is cool. You are in for a real fun and enjoyable and meaningful discussion with Erwan and Alicia Davon. Erwan has been teaching sensuality, how to connect to people. And this is something that's we all need, especially nowadays, that we're disconnected, we're all over the place. It's hard. It's hard. Whether you're in a relationship or you'd like to be in a relationship, either way, what Erwan and Alicia are doing is something that you can really tap into. I'm a huge fan of what they're doing. I love their style, and like you feel it. It's visceral. You can see the joy in how they experience each other. So if you want to experience both emotional and physical bliss, this is a wild episode that we got to explore. This is a new one because it really kind of went outside the lines of what we often talk about on the show. I think this is something I recommend that you reach out. So all the links are going to be below, of course, in how to reach to Erwan and Alicia. But you hear their story. And if you like stories like this, then do me a favor and hit that button. I never know which side the button's on. But do me a favor, hit subscribe, because this is how we stay connected. In a remote world, when you want to hear great stories like this is your chance. You've all been great. You've been fantastic. I love the feedback. Anyways, let's get to the good stuff. This is Erwan and Alicia Davon, and we're going to learn about discovering each other, discovering yourself. This is wild. Enjoy. Here it goes. Disco Posse Podcast.
Hey, this is Alicia Davon.
And Erwan Davon.
And you're listening to the Disco Posse Podcast.
Nice. It's my throwback to all the classic radio people where they have to do, hey, this is Hugh Jackman and you're listening to CFNY. But with that, Alicia, Erwan, thank you very much. It's neat occasionally when I get to, I'll say, step outside of the lines of the typical guest that I have on the show. And as I've gone over the last, at this point, 100 episodes, I saw this natural morph into, real personal stories and people that were learning very much personal lessons. And that's why even the founder stories that I have on here, mostly the important things that come out of it are personal lessons. When I saw you come up as a guest option, I thought this is fantastic because I can get rid of the fluff of the founder story and we can really talk about being ourselves, being good for ourselves and good for each other. So if you want to introduce yourselves for folks that are new to you, we'll of course have links to find where you're at online and such, but let us know how people can contact you. And let's talk about Alicia and Erwan, where your story begins.
Oh, you start, baby.
It begins in overseas in a land far away called France. But I came over when I was 2, grew up in New York City, very tough childhood. My parents were breaking up even before I was born. They immigrated. When I was 7, my mother went back. They had a really nasty divorce. And it got worse from there. I'll spare you all the details. But the point is that my sort of relationship blueprint, if you will, got pretty messed up early on because the model that I had, wasn't a good model, wasn't a functional model. So I was in psychoanalysis at 15 years old, multiple days a week. And it completely transformed my life. Then I went to from New York to California, took every workshop I possibly could, studied psychology, sorted myself out more. And to make a long story short, eventually took all that focus, put it into romantic relationship. I, literally was at a cafe one day. I had this wild sex life. I was a young guy in my early 20s. I took out a piece of paper. I just started free writing. What am I most interested in? And, right at the top, it's women, and then like right under that is sex, and it's like, yeah, that's what I'm really interested in. And, I'd been director of a yoga ashram. I'd lived in a Zen monastery. I had a degree in psychology, all this stuff. And I just took all of that sort of human focus and turned it into relational focus and a romantic relational focus. And then 15 years later, after teaching for that decade and a half, Alicia came along and made it about 10 times better and brighter. And now we've got a family and a beautiful little boy. And, it all turned out. And in the beginning, it did not look like it was going to turn out.
Yeah, no one can write the first chapter until the 10th chapter. And you realize where it actually begins. There's like where we think the story begins is very much not where it actually begins. It's where the story picks up. I think life is like a Quentin Tarantino movie in that you really start in the middle and then you start to go backwards and find the origin story that led you to this moment. And then once you realize that, you begin to play out the back half of the movie. It's actually sort of a fantastic way in which I've realized, now I've got a lot of my life that's in hindsight, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it.
Thank God.
Welcome to the United States, and I tell you, another thing, like I said, that stood out in why I really enjoyed like the personal stories of everything is that like people make everything, business, sales, products, technologies, everything underneath it all. It's a people story. And people always ask me, they're like, what's the most important book you've ever read, that helped you to deal with technology? I said, easy. It's DSM-4, the diagnostics of mental disorders. And they're like, how does they don't understand that. And I say, well, because you don't know how people work until you know how they break. And when you look back on your own origin stories, Erwan, and you talk about this, like, when you're in therapy, when you're opening up to people, you can really explore where you found your edges, and then you know where they are. And it allows you to be much more exploratory now, I find anyways, like I said, too, because I know where my sort of personal edges are, and it's tough to find those, right?
It really is. Getting to know oneself really is the center, really is the most important. And nowadays, tech and a lot of things can amplify that. It's pretty awesome. And then, Alicia, when you came along, things just sort of blew open.
Well, and I'll start by saying I had pretty much the opposite childhood as Erwan did. I grew up in a suburb of LA. My parents still live in the same house that my brother and I grew up in. It was very stable and loving and predictable. And I remember the little grass hill that I would sit on outside my elementary school. My mom would pull up at the exact right time. I never had to wait. It was all like very good, right? And what I realized though, when I went off to college is that, good and stable and comfortable is nice, but like, I sort of wanted something more and was wondering what else is there in life. And I was headed, Erwan mentioned his relationship blueprint, like our languaging for the patterns that kind of set you up for life unconsciously. I was headed into like a stable, I'd find a relationship, get married, have kids, and like that would be cool. I wanted something more. I started exploring. I studied psychology in college. I got a master's degree in psychology. And by the time that I reached that master's program, I was slowly becoming obsessed with not only psychology, but sexuality and female sexuality. And like, how do we develop relationships as women? And I was basically ravenous for any information I could get on this. And I was holed up in the library at my graduate school reading and trying to figure myself out. And a friend of mine in my program said, hey, I just met this guy. His name's Erwan, and he runs this organization devoted to pleasure and relationships and sexuality. You got to meet him. So I'm like, all right, this guy sounds pretty cool. Take me to him. I get to Erwan's house. She brings me over there. She says he's having a gathering, a class of some sort. And I walk in and it was like a scene. It was a scene. It was like packed full of people. Everybody's like looking into each other's eyes, talking, connecting. There's like this ecstasy vibe in the room, and I was like, I've found where I want to be. So when I finished my master's, I instead, first grabbed onto Erwan as a boyfriend. I'm like, I need him in my life. He was rocking my world. I eventually joined his organization and started teaching with him. So that was almost 20 years ago now.
Wow. Now, 20 years ago, and what's interesting about the insight into yourselves and thus each other, like from the outside, it's funny, we're on camera, so for people that are seeing the video version of this, they can see it, but as either of you speak, the other one is incredibly focused on the other one, right? And I'd say that there's definitely something that 20 years in, it is amazing to be able to see that you are enthralled with the words even and the moment. And I find, while technology is fantastic and it can connect people and it can do amazing things, one of the things it can often do is mean that we do this when we're sitting next to those we love, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're staring into the phone, and it's tough to recapture sometimes that, like, just watching their mouth move and and remembering what it feels like. It's a very instinctual thing that we can crave, and it's nice to see people. I always say, like, you see like a 60-year-old couple and they like their pinkies are hooked as they walk in the park, kind of thing. It's so cute to watch.
It's a really good point, and I appreciate you noticing that, Eric. And there's a drift in the world towards distraction. Maybe it started with, I don't know what, radio, TV, there's a drift kind of away from the person. And it's not just a technology drift. It's kind of a human into thought drift. We can kind of lose contact with ourselves. So, just so your audience has some practical things to do, I'll tell you what we do. We have 4 practices that we do every day. And the first one is meditation. We're a relationship school, and sex and extended orgasm and dating and flirting and all this wild stuff. But, we start our day with meditation. It brings back that undistracted, concentrated way of being. Secondly, body practice, just simple, basic body practice. And I don't mean it has to be lifting weights or, jogging 3 miles or something like that. It could be, walking around barefoot in your yard, feeling the grass under your feet, something to really not recreate, but bring one back into one's body. Third thing is psychological inquiry. We do that regularly. We don't necessarily do that together every day, but we do it several times a week together. Where are you at? How do you feel? We take some time each. We kind of like dive in, and we don't report stuff to each other. We really check in, like, how are we feeling? What's going on? We experientially do a deep dive into our experience together. And that kind of excavates that old relationship blueprint and brings that freshness and that newness that I really appreciate you noticing, even so many decades in.
Yeah.
And then the last one is sensual practice. Shortly before we got on your podcast, we're doing our daily sensual practice with each other. I know this is a, modern times kind of podcast, so maybe we'll get into that later. And it's amazing to have a relationship that's more turned on 2 decades in than it was even in the beginning. Because when this hot girl showed up at my class, like, yeah, it was great to start, and now it's better. It's really a blessing, but it comes from daily practice. That's my point.
Yeah. And this is what's, I even like when we record this, the hard part about, like, I love the video aspect and it's great. The downside of the video aspect is I've had people complain that, like, when people are on video calls that you're looking at the laptop, not looking in, and so it looks like you're looking away. So for like this weird thing of how to look on video is I have to look into the camera as we talk. The downside is, like, people are going to see it, especially in this one, because I genuinely do want to I want to visually connect to you, and that's why we're better in conversation in as humans when we're, in person. It's much easier. There's a lot of nonverbal stuff that happens, and you become very in tune to it the more you do it. Like, as a public speaker, I learned that early. That's how people said, how do you become good at public speaking? I said, easy. I've got two fantastically good ears that I've put into practice for decades, listening to other people who are very good at it. I emulate what they do, but more importantly, I look at the reaction that every real-time moment creates, and I pivot and adjust my speech patterns and my talk track and my content based on the in the moment sensation that I'm getting back from the audience. It's difficult sometimes in a larger room, but you can still do it, even if you just like pick 2 or 3 people and you like concentrate on them. So you're like literally like looking at them in the audience, and they're like 10 seats back, and you see them smiling and laughing, and they become your kind of like collective representation of people. The reason why I say this is, like, when we look at a blueprint and you talk about the blueprint of a relationship, I say the blueprint is like that one person in the audience that you're like, we've got enough of our own personal experiences that you know what you like. And then you can measure this with somebody else and they react in a way that's positive. And then at that point, you can now kind of go to the wider audience, say, okay, we've got this neat idea. I want you to try this stuff out with me. And, so that's why I'm excited to hear about, how did you develop a blueprint of what a good relationship is?
Well, for Alicia, it started with a good blueprint, but it, as you said, it didn't have a certain something. For me, it started with a difficult blueprint, so it didn't have too much. And then we put together, from experience, what are the stages that a relationship goes through, so that people, relationship is maybe the most important thing in life, and people tend to kind of wing it. So we put together a blueprint of the stages of relationship.
And it's exciting to have a blueprint or a map of the stages of relationship and the skills necessary to succeed in relationship, because a lot of people tend to feel like, well, I just don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know how to have a great relationship, or I don't have sex skills, and that's just it. I'm just stuck with that. Not true. You can learn, like if all of us went to school in some way, and we sat at those desks and we listened and we wrote and we practiced things, and relationship is the same thing. You can get good at it.
And, for example, the dating stage, I wasn't very good at dating, but I was committed to being good at dating. So I made an agreement with myself, and I went out and made some kind of offer every day to a woman in the beginning just to learn. And, you can imagine the amount of rejection that I experienced, but I stayed with it. And, one of the things I learned is that, especially from a guy's point of view, showing a woman a good time, like, that is key. I was taking every possible approach. But they didn't work, trying to impress and trying to, look good, and trying to, and inviting, oh, let's hang out, let's have coffee, let's have dinner. Yeah, it's not terrible, but it's kind of boring, So showing her a good time, having fun, doing things where the woman can really be turned on, go ice skating, let's go to a Van Gogh exhibit if she likes art, not like, hey, let's hang out, and that kind of excitement. So that's a little bit of a blueprint for dating, do things that are fun, do things that really get you out. Then you get into the middle game of relationship, and Alicia was much stronger in this part. I was stronger in the kind of dating, let's go have fun part, it's a little bit extreme. And, the middle game is all about vulnerability. It's about communication and, that good communication is being approving and telling the truth and really opening one's heart and like that. I remember the first time I told a woman I loved her, was my college girlfriend. And, I realized it. And, here I am, this transformational guy taking all these workshops, all this stuff. So I'm all into telling the truth. And like, I'm about to tell her. And it's like, I couldn't get it out. I was that weak, at the skills. I did get it out,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is it was like traumatic to say it, but that's part of the blueprint or what works in middle game of relationship, really being vulnerable. And then you get to that sort of eternal date, we call it, or soulmate relationship part. And that's all about commitment and
cherishing the person, like really seeing their value in your life, being present to that.
It's really easy. People lose that, a couple of decades into a relationship. They forget, like, oh, this person is supremely important to me.
Right. Well, the reason why the blueprint, or just like having those moments to kind of remember how we got to this moment, it's important because of it's just like anything, when it's easy, it's easy. When it's not, that's where the real work comes in, and you really begin to test your ability to manage things. Like when stresses are applied, they, especially with early relationships, like you said, you've got the dating phase. They call it the honeymoon phase. Everything has a honeymoon phase when everybody's like super excited. And then there's a moment, that will come at some point where you're sort of existing, and a lot of existence occurs without as much excitement. And even more challenging is that then you have to add, first time buying a house, having children, splitting your time to, children and family, and elderly family begins to get ill. And so we find ourselves very subdivided. Our careers, are burgeoning in the same time when our relationships are. And so all of a sudden you've got this real sort of torn person, in yourself. How do we get better at like recognizing and recentering, on what should keep us a good, like, this is a good moment, and this is a good life, and this is a good thing, and I got to remember that.
It's a really good question. And a lot of people have challenges with this. I mean, in general, and particularly in the tech world, we work with a lot of folks that are working for big tech companies, and the hours are insane. And, there's one student that I'm thinking of, a couple that we're working with, actually. He works for one of the big tech companies here. And he's like, they're at this place in their relationship where they've been together a bunch of years. I think they're married. And they're like, looking at buying a house and looking at having kids, but like they just realized, oh my gosh, we're not spending any time together. We're obsessed with our jobs. The chemistry isn't what it used to be. Should we even be together? Couples often ask that of themselves. Okay. So like they are fabulous people and just aren't spending the time and the energy in their relationship life. And I was working with her the other night, and she's like, I just want to have more chemistry. It's like, I have all this love for my husband, and I just, so what we've told them to do, we talked about these practices, and we have a whole video that outlines these different types of sensual practices. Some are like kind of clothed and more nurturing, and they go all the way across the spectrum to more directly sexual practices. And they practice. He sits up by her side, she lays down, he puts his hands on her, and she just gets to relax and feel, and they're physically connected. And suddenly all those like work concerns and blah, 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 poof, just disappear. And there they are with each other, and their connections restored. Having a practice daily, ideally, is what brings them back together.
It's a great question. Taking an hour a day at least for your partner and your relationship, like that alone, like just, okay, this hour is for us. And we're just, like that alone will change things. Then if you add in the kind of practices that Alicia's talking about, simple stuff, one person sits up, the other person lays down, one hand on the abdomen, one hand on the heart, a little new age music on, some incense, that kind of thing. Go 5-10 minutes one way, 5-10 minutes the other way, spend a few minutes talking about it afterwards, maybe have a glass of wine, you get back connected with the person. So, maybe rule number one is give that relationship some time. And if people are dating and they haven't even gotten to those honeymoon phases and those kind of breakdowns, give dating some time. We support a lot of people in tech companies, and it's awesome. They're taking the world by storm. And, they are working 50 hours a week, sometimes 60, 70 hours a week, and it's all fine and good until, the hair starts to get gray at 35 and they're not in a relationship, don't even have relationship skills at 45. And, and then, God forbid there's a heart attack at 55, to put first things first and actually allocate some time to it and then do some actual real training. And those touching practices can all go all the way from connection to sexual practices. Those dating practices can get, there's a lot of artistry to flirting. One of the things I learned, I remember I lived in Berkeley at the time, and I was out in one of my daily times going out, I hadn't made an offer all day. I'd been sort of putting it off. It was about midnight, but I was committed. I'd taken all these transformational courses. So I knew all about okay, I'm going to keep my word and all this stuff. So I'm, out at midnight, there's nobody out, but I find some bar, someplace, and end up chatting with this woman. And what I noticed is, we're sitting on these bar stools, we've got these big purple drinks at midnight. It's super surreal scene. I think there's some kind of Japanese anime playing up in the corner. And, 1 minute she's looking at me and flirting with me and really turning me on. And then and then the next minute she's pulling away from me. And, there weren't even cell phones back then. I don't know if she was reading a book or something, and what I noticed is that every time she'd pull away and read the book, I'd kind of lean in and try to get her attention. And then every time, she'd kind of put her attention on me, I'd sort of get blown out and kind of overwhelmed and sort of disappear. And then the thing just petered out, and nothing happened. And then a couple of days, I thought about it for a couple of days. A couple of days later, I went out. I'm in conversation with another woman, I think at a park. And, she was doing the same thing. And then I noticed oh, I've been seeing this forever. 1 minute that's a sort of, she's coming toward you. The next minute she's going away. And I realized I just reversed what I was doing when a woman was leaning in at the park. She had this beautiful red hair and she'd lean towards me. Then I'd lean towards her. Right. And then when she would get distracted by something, or I think she had a dog, she was doing something, I'd give her space. So when she was going away, I'd give her space. And when she was coming towards me, I'd come towards her. And I noticed the more I did that, people on video can see my hand. Let me do it for towards me, I'm going towards her and she's going away. I'm not chasing her and running away. This is what you don't want to do. When she's coming toward her, she started coming more and more towards me. It was like I was mirroring her. And I realized oh, I'm just starting to pay attention to a woman and what she wants and respond to her appetite. And that day just changed everything.
Yeah, women really like that. We want attention, and attention doesn't always mean more right there. It might mean less for the moment. I mean, one of the big reasons that Erwan and I are together, I think, is because he had basically mastered this skill by the time we met. And I was when Erwan and I met, there was that original time we met that I shared about. Then we, lost contact for a few months. I was in this other relationship that was going downhill. So we let that one run its course. We happened to see each other again at this workshop we ended up being at together. I was ooh, that guy Erwan's here, and I spent the weekend flirting with him and making eyes at him. And then appropriately at the end, he comes right up to me and said, "Hey, that was so fun. Would you like to get some tea in the city?" And I turned right around and I'm looked at him like he was crazy and said, I don't know, because I was scared. And then he did not miss a beat. He said, "All right, when you're ready, here's my number. And he walked away. And I was like, you know, that got my attention. And then there were a few more rounds of that over 4 months before I finally realized that I was scared and being silly, and I was ready to surrender for that. I was so attracted.
So that's our long way of saying, allocate some time to the dating or the relationship and flirt during that time, touch during that time, pay attention to the dynamic, and it will accelerate, like anything will accelerate that we apply ourselves to.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting thing because, even as you talk about this, it's why one of the most fantastic books I recommend to people is Never Split the Difference, written by Chris Voss. He talks about tactical empathy. The concept of it is about negotiation. Everything in life is a negotiation. Every moment, relationships, business, it's all in a sense that, and so it's funny when you talk about this idea of it's very much like being very attentive to the reaction that you're creating and giving. And it's this real sort of like a fencing dodge, thrust, parry, like sort of thing. But it's beautiful symmetry when it starts to come together. And then you can start to recognize when the patterns change. And then you can usually detect it's symptomatic of another thing. And especially the longer you're together, you can find those things. The hardest part, I think, that people find is that even though they know, they're like, okay, you're sitting there and Alicia's saying, okay, Erwan's, yeah, he's not leaning in as much as normal. And 10 years in, sometimes we just don't ask, or we don't pause to like figure out why. And then it becomes 11 and 12 years. And then it becomes normal for Erwan to not lean in anymore. And like I even find like people with their body, I always say like, I don't even know how old I am. I'm 40 something. I honestly don't remember because it doesn't matter to me, but I've always had this thing that when I was young, you start off and people they want to show you're working out and they want to show you're strong. Like, it's like you have these things like guys do this, goofy thing. Right. And then when we're 25 or 22, even all the guys are sitting there around the pool and they're patting their bellies that are getting bigger. Like they're proud of yeah, I'm aging. I'm getting no, we don't have to let it degrade. We don't have to change. Like we can be as energetic and as attentive to ourselves at 40, 50, 60, 70. But we at some point say, well, it's been a while since I've worked out, or been a while since we've, been able to be intimate. It's been a while. That's normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that phenomenon of distraction, that phenomenon of our attention goes to less important things. That's why, it's a good point you made earlier about, looking back at history and you see, how things did happen. It really was a blessing that I went through all that difficulty early in life. I got a really big dose of truth, that life could be that difficult. And it taught me something, which is to be connected to the truth, to be connected to reality. If there's a relationship, people go through the honeymoon phase and then things start to die down. If they're dying down, if you tell the truth about it, it makes all the difference because then you can attend to it.
Right.
If we're distracted from it, it doesn't happen. We have a kid, our sex life died down for a while after the kid, and we talked about it, we addressed it, and we doubled down on our practices. There's a variety. It's not like we have a perfect relationship, not because it's all perfect, but because we're willing to include all the breakdowns and all the issues and all the problems. We're very upfront with each other about them and other people about them. And it just puts it all in the light of consciousness, to be, a little bit spiritual with you. It puts it all in the light of awareness, and that has a beautiful depth to it. It has an evolutionary intelligence, like things get addressed, they start to just function better. If somebody's 50 years old and they're getting out of health, if they just kind of be with that and feel it and tell the truth about it, there's a natural motivation to attend to that. And it's the same thing with relationship and romance. One of the reasons we pick relationship and romance as our focus to teach our students is, yes, because it's fun and it's that important, but also because it's that difficult. It's if we can attend to something that's that chargy, that kind of pushes our buttons that much, it's easier to go to a cocktail party and talk about death and a funeral than it is to talk in explicit detail about orgasm or right. What you're going through with your relationship partner, or how much you love them, or how you're just so pissed off the other day, or, whatever it is, but when we can attend to life with that kind of truth, that kind of heart, that kind of honesty, boy, the potential of life just explodes. It just becomes a supernova, and really that human potential becomes fulfilled. And to have that kind of awareness in a relationship, that's why we call it an eternal date. It's like, the relationship kind of, it's certainly taken me by storm.
But I said, but the reason also why I thought of the Chris Voss reference is because you talked about mirroring, and that's a very effective thing. And when we talk about engaging with people, is that you begin to mirror them and you begin to connect with them. So it's funny that, it seems like if you break it down, like anything in psychology and behavioral psychology, it feels a little weird when you break it down to the science of the mind and the emotions, because you almost feel like people always say like, well, isn't it hard? You're just like, you're seeing data in the way that people behave. Like, no, I'm seeing how data can align with how people behave, and learning how to recognize when patterns occur, and then learning patterns that I can embrace that allow me to better engage, disengage, whatever. I'm curious, where does the pure science sort of study that you have to do meet with the true anecdotal, like lived experiences, and how do you balance, especially this many years into your practices, like when do you revisit, okay, let's go back and kind of take a look through the history books again and see if this is still kind of relevant?
I mean, we're always inquiring. I went to a math and science high school, Stuyvesant High School in Manhattan. So I have a math and science background. Studied a lot of that in college as well, with the psychology, separate from the psychology degree, but alongside it. Science and love, they're not separate. We kind of have this thing like, you were talking about seeing patterns. Well, there's something that has you want to see those patterns, and there's something that makes those patterns. And, I really think Einstein said it best. He said, what did he say? God doesn't, they were talking about randomness and non-randomness. And he said, basically, God doesn't throw dice or something like that. There really is something alive, and we all feel it, and it's not separate from our behavior. There is all this data and all this information, and they're not really separate. And it's a very powerful human way to look at it, to investigate the data and what's going on and be truthful about it that way. And it's not separate from the love and the caring and the consciousness. The medical field is kind of starting to acknowledge that, wow, if people are relaxed when they have an operation, they do better. And science is starting to acknowledge that too. Oh, there's something about how we perceive the experiment that has something to do with the result of the experiment.
Right.
So it's one of our MOs. Sometimes we'll teach something about Tantra, for example. But we teach it in a very Western way, Tantra or extended orgasm. Okay, what are the signs of orgasm? All right, involuntary contractions in this muscle, in the genital, and, engorgement and darkness around the eyes and all the rest of this kind of stuff. That's not separate from the pleasure. It's not separate from the bliss. It's not separate from the love. It's just a different dimension of it. It's a different way of looking at it. So Alicia and I are always teaching that stuff, talking about that stuff, engaged in that stuff. And, it's not separate from our meditation practice or our feeling of love when, I have my hand on her heart and her abdomen, or she has her hand on my heart, my abdomen. We're kind of always attending to that.
Yeah, and things are changing so fast in the world. So our work and our teaching is very dynamic, in terms of statistics on hormonal differences and changes that are happening in men and women's bodies because of, the distraction, the technology, the state of the world. We focus a lot on the changing world in what we teach because we need to keep up with all of that. And then at the same time, there's the constant what's here.
Right.
I have 3 clients I've worked with recently, and, one of them said, I just don't have the chemistry I used to have anymore. And he was kind of a little bit in a panic, and he even had some erectile issues and stuff like that. We're not doctors, but, we'll support people in that kind of stuff. And, doing some research found out testosterone levels are down, depending on what study you look at, 30 to 50% in males over, I forget what it is, the past 50 or 60 years. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's a really big deal. And it really does have a lot to do with people's lifestyles and what's going on. I think it also has a lot to do with, there's kind of a cultural, we went from a very conservative thing about sex, rigid stereotype roles, and now there's this whole politically correct thing, which seems to be kind of anti-masculine and feminine. So it's kind of like all these ways of squashing, sexuality and turn on and lifestyle and all the rest of that. Yeah, we definitely have to look at the data.
Yeah, when it's always funny. Like I like asking the question. I love the way that you described it, because and my simple, when I try to explain to people, they're like, how can you like go into like the breakdown of people to like help understand it? Doesn't it take you too far in a weird direction or whatever? And I'm like, no. I said, do you understand it? When you look at when a bee creates a honeycomb, it's perfectly hexagonal. And they're like, yeah, well, I mean, it turns out that I guess bees know something about math, right? Most people think like, oh, look, the bees, they know math. They know geometry. You're like, no, it's actually, math was a result of, it's derivative of nature. And I said, but what's even more fantastic about it? Honey. It's really great. Like, take all the math out of it. Do you like honey? Beautiful, right? Like, there's a beauty in in what the product is. There's nothing wrong with studying it, and sometimes even just getting lost in trying to figure out how it works. But then what you really want to come back to is, this is good honey.
The enjoyment, the experience.
Yeah. And like relationships too, is like when somebody, especially when they're relational therapists, even like behavioral psychologists, like people that are deep into like helping clinical psychologists, they themselves sometimes have to step out, get mentors, go to their peers. They have to go to therapy so that they can get out of the data and digging into the mathematics of beekeeping so that they can relish the honey again, right?
That's exactly right. Getting to the essence of things. It's not separate from the data or the surface. If we sort of talk spiritual talk for a minute, you've got the surface, the manifest, but there's the unmanifest. What is life? What is consciousness? Nobody can produce that. We don't know anything, even a tiny little thing about that, but we know we really care about it. If you find out you have 5 minutes left to live, it's like, all of a sudden how important life is becomes really obvious. If somebody's getting divorced, all of a sudden how important their relationship partner is becomes really obvious. Or if they're undistracted, maybe on vacation, on a beach, and the thoughts die down for a little bit, how beautiful life is. And excuse me, the water and the beach and the air, even the sensation, like, wow, it's really beautiful. To get back to that essence. And that's why we recommend meditation, even though we're a relationship school, getting into them and having great ones and all that. We recommend that kind of self-contact first, with a capital S. So it's self, but not self like ego identity, self like with a capital S, like life, like spirit, what's ultimately beautiful. That's the really important part. And being a human being, it's really easy to miss that because we're so good at putting attention on stuff and doing stuff. And we become human doings instead of human beings. I remember being in the Zen monastery and, sitting there and the first day I got there, they woke me up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's obscene. And walked me into this giant dark room that's like, this room was enormous, hundreds of people in this room, and it's not even light out. You can literally barely see where you're going. There's just little candles around, and they sit me on this thing, and I'm all ready to get zen and be super cool. So I'm sitting on this Zafu for 4 hours, and it's terrible. And I'm falling asleep, and it's just, it's really like some kind of torture. So, a little later that morning, I think around 11 a.m., I told him I'm leaving. And the head monk, he said, well, why? And I said, well, blah, 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 in the morning, and I'm tired and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And he said, were you in the Zen meditation hall? And I said, yeah. Yeah. So then you were doing it all perfectly. And I didn't even know, what did he mean? So, but some kind of something happened, something I couldn't explain, something I wasn't even aware of. I went in the next morning, all the same thing. I'm falling asleep. It's terrible. All the rest of this kind of stuff. And then something just clicked, and I just had space, just like that enormous room. I just had space for all of the experience, the suffering and the fatigue and the body aches. And then I noticed there's all this consciousness and all this awareness, and there's this ineffable essence, and I am that essence, and nothing had changed. Right. Just the essence had been revealed. And it's really important to pay attention to that. We pay attention to a lot of things, but we often forget what's the most important.
And I think it's the ability to focus. And sort of that forced focus can spur it on, which is, I guess, really in line with what we talked about, right? We're in a world of continuous distractions, and it's difficult to be able to, number one, get that focus, or even most importantly, direct the focus to someone and have that be bi-directional as well. It has to be we have to focus on each other, and that's where the communication comes in. So I'll say this, is when you speak with people, how often do two people come to you? How often does one person come to you about two people? I'm just curious, not statistically, but in general, do you find that people are self-aware or couple aware when they're already coming to you?
It ranges. So very often if we're talking a couple, okay, very often one of the couple, one person will be the one to be like, we got some stuff, we need to get some help. And they are the one to come and contact us. Now, very often they can get their partner on board with it. They say, hey, I talked to Alicia, and I think we should do one of these classes. And then their partner willingly comes along, and that's great. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the partner isn't on board or isn't on board yet. And then we just work with one half of the couple, which can have a big effect on the relationship also. And then, of course, people who are completely single come to us.
And I would say it's about 60% folks who are single come to us, about 40% in couples. And as Alicia said, I think that the folks who are in couples, it's about 50% of that both people come, and about 50% it's one of the people who come. And just to give your audience kind of a tip, if you're single and you're interested in getting into a relationship, find somebody who's interested in growing and developing that relationship, and willing to put that kind of focus that Eric, you just mentioned, willing to do that. It's like if we switched over to tech or business for a minute, if you wanted a business partner, you'd find somebody who was interested in growing the business. That's right. And in relationship, people often they pick the person based on their height or something. As a woman I'm working with, I absolutely love her. She's absolutely adorable. But height was a main criteria of in her, and it just wasn't working. I'm not that tall. She's getting coaching for me. You've just excluded, everybody
Oh my God.
So pick somebody who's interested in growing and developing the relationship. It's the number one variable in the success of a relationship. And if you're in a couple already, make the person who's more interested in growing and developing the relationship the decision maker, the person in charge of that relationship, and what you don't do and do in that relationship. They'll lead it to a better place than the other.
Well, and in terms of being an attractive partner, I mean, there's a lot of ways to be attractive as a partner, especially as a woman. There's lots of ways, but being a person that's willing to grow and develop is the best quality. It makes you the best kind of relationship partner. Then the other stuff comes after that.
I recently went to a high school reunion online, and, it was great. And I loved seeing those people. And it was a little bit awkward because, not all of them, but most of them were exactly the way they were in high school. Like, they talked the same, and even their bank accounts were about the same. You know what I'm saying? I don't mean to be too crass there, but it was like, they were basically the same. Most of them were even living in the same place. Yeah. Right. Growing and developing is key for everything. And in the beginning, I like that word you used. It does take some forced focus in the beginning, and just to get Zen about it again, like, they have no problem with, in the beginning of Zen practice, using a lot of force. When I lived in a Zen monastery, we don't do this with our students, but they would hit us with sticks. This whole you'd stay awake doing your meditation when, they're going to hit you with a stick if you fall asleep.
Time to get Zen. Whack.
Wake up.
Well, there was a movie called Grosse Pointe Blank, and I always remember this line, one of my favorite. He says, "I went to my high school reunion, and everybody looked exactly the same, except that they'd been stung by bees. Like, they were just like all like slightly bloated versions of their exact youthful selves." It's funny that you brought up something before, and I want to dig in a bit, if you don't mind. You talked about taking the lead in the relationship. And this is an interesting thing because obviously, especially in modern relationships, we've got so much, everybody's working, everybody's raising the kids, everybody's doing side gigs, side hustles, all this stuff that's going on. When do you sort of decide who is the CEO and who's the COO, in the continuous fluctuation in the way the relationship works nowadays?
At one level, maybe the most important level, from our viewpoint, the woman is the CEO of the relationship because she's the one with the appetite, and if it's people who are gay, the feminine person, the more feminine of the two, because, if you look at those nature shows from, when I was a kid, I used to watch these nature shows on public broadcast station, PBS, and the female goes into heat, right? So the female has the appetite and the romantic appetite. And of course, as guys, we get turned on and all the rest of that kind of stuff, and love and all that. I'm not saying guys don't experience that, but there's a way it initiates. There's a way the woman or the feminine person is attractive and the male brings the flowers. So what she wants is really critical to the sort of glow and turn on, if you will, of the relationship. You could even say the romantic exhilaration of the relationship. If I'm thinking of going to one restaurant, Alicia's thinking of going to another restaurant, I'm happy to go to the restaurant that she wants to go to because she's just going to be lit up and happy and turned on. And it's just a way better date that way. Yeah. So at one level, it's always the woman. But then at another level, it's the person who's willing to grow and develop more.
And to what you just said, Erwan, it's an amazing opportunity for women to find their power in romantic relationship. One big goal that women often have when they come to work with us, whether it's they're already in a relationship or they're single, is like, I want to find out more about what I want, and I want to have what I want in romantic relationships. So women really getting in touch with their power is a huge part of our work because we affect our romantic lives so strongly. You know, there's a woman I'm working with now who's coming out of a divorce, and it's been like a year-long process. And the first thing she said to me when I was like, you know, what do you want out of this? You know, this coaching relationship. She's like, I want to know where the F my desire went. Where is it? I need it. And she was like, it's so important. We're set, our turn on, our desire, our appetite, huge assets in romantic relationship. And when Erwan was just talking about the restaurant and going to the one I want to go, he's empowered in that. You know, he's not a doormat. He's empowered. He's my hero.
See, Alicia's very approving about that. So that's the other side of it. You know, the appetite has to go along with the approval. It's not like, you know, I'll be a little crass for a minute. It's not about being a demanding bitch and being a castrated guy. Right. Nowadays, very popular, unfortunately. Right. It's like, you know, I feel like a knight in shining armor. I'm around her and, you know, I can't do anything wrong. I feel like Superman.
You know what? It's funny, and when you look to nature, there's interesting examples. One classic thing you see, like when a dog lays back, right, and they let you rub their belly, it's the sense that you are like, they are exposing themselves to you, and that you are thus sort of like becoming dominant. So like, no, they're acknowledging that they are so comfortable with their dominance that they can expose themselves freely without worry. It's actually the complete reverse of what most people think. And it's funny when we go through these things, my grandparents who have since passed on, they're fantastic. And they were 65 years they had together, you know, that, which I don't think it can exist anymore unless you get married at 2. It's hard to find a relationship that can last 65 years. But we sat at the table one time, and my parents, my mom was French, so she cooked everything like a particular way, classic French style. So my grandparents come over for Christmas dinner, and my grandmother, she's like going, like the vegetables are like barely steamed, crispy, crunchy vegetables as a true sort of Parisian style. And my grandfather was from Wales, where basically when you make peas, the water's green and the peas aren't. That's how they do it. And my grandmother says at this large table, she says, well, your grandfather won't really like these vegetables. He likes his stuff much more well done and cooked. And he leans over to me, and I was just like, I was 7 at the time. And he says, no, I don't. That's how you do 65 years, kids. You do things that are not for you. They're for both of you. And that moment taught me that sometimes it's better to just do the right thing for both of you than, and like sort of it in a way, it was actually kind of fun. I think that he would just, every time she probably made him something to eat, he's like, I definitely wouldn't have ordered it this way in a restaurant, but you know, I'm proud to be here with you because you did this for me.
It's beautiful. You know, you could really feel a lot of love in that. You know, there's a way that a man surrenders to a woman, and there's a way that a woman surrenders to a man, and it's very different. You know, and the false self, or the ego identity, if you will, to just get into psychological talk for a minute, it kind of is just inherently selfish. But then when we get outside of that, outside of the original relationship blueprint and into a more functional blueprint, surrender is really key. You know, really being able to, you know, be open. And, you know, a man surrenders to a woman in terms of having her appetite really drive things. And a woman surrenders to a man in a lot of different ways. You know, it's not really my, you can talk about that. But it's nice. You know, it's complementary. It's different. It's real diversity, not this kind of homogenous thing that's sort of passing for diversity nowadays.
Yeah, well, this is the tough part when we get into these discussions, is you can almost sense sort of people's like kind of backs go up sometimes, even when we talk about this in a group. And it's not meant, when we talk about, you know, submissive and dominant and these things, it's not a permanent situation as in one's in chains and the other one has a whip. It is very much like there are moments of submission. There are moments of giving in and sharing and exposing yourself. And it's like, they're little things that it's, for whatever reason, we've attached this kind of archetype that when you use this word, that you are thus, the female in the relationship, you must be continuous. Like, no, that's not what we mean. It's 2021, for goodness sakes. We've figured it out. We've seen history live out. And I find it's harder because people are probably unwilling to have the necessary discussions around relationship positions that change and they adapt to moments, because there's this sense that we're supposed to shed the archetypes that that led us up to Dr. Spock, who's probably not particularly good at child rearing, as it turns out. But
it's hard, and it's funny you should say that, Eric, because it's hard. You're right. It's hard because it's very triggering. It brings up a lot of emotion and a lot of issues. So, we're relationship coaches for singles and couples, but most of the work we do with people, most of the heavy lifting is the psychological work, those really tender issues. Most of the heavy lifting is not like, hey, here's a great sex position, or extended orgasm is this, and you can stroke this way and do that, or flirt this or flirt that, but dealing with that relationship blueprint. And it was a blessing for me that mine was so difficult, because I had to attend to it. If it hadn't been so difficult, my focus wouldn't have been forced in that direction. And sometimes people can get by without attending to it. But it's a mistake not to attend to ourselves and our relationships.
Definitely. And so I want to touch on a subject that's very interesting. And if you're below 18, kids, turn off the radio now. This is where because one of the practices you talk about is extended orgasm. And there's a strong physical nature to a lot of the work that you do in relation. Like it's part of a relationship. So if you don't mind, I'd like to explore what that, tell people, what is it when you talk about this? What does it mean to them and to them in their relationship?
So what we mean when we say extended orgasm, so it's not just this like airy idea. There's orgasm, right? Which is, in the dictionary, they call it a climax of sexual tension, which is like, okay, it's definitely more than that. There's some clinical signs that say, okay, this person's having an orgasm in their body, including involuntary contractions in the genitals and flushing of the skin and increased heart rate. And then we've added in the sense of pleasure and release, which isn't really clinical, but there's these signs of orgasm that happen in the body. And extended orgasm is being able to experience all of those signs of orgasm in your body, like as a state over time throughout the body, versus like a 10-second experience that you've kind of clenched and reached for like a goal. It's a state of letting go and having pleasure in the body.
So Masters and Johnson's distinguished orgasm, the way Alicia described the clinical signs, for example, for a male, it's typically 6 to 9 involuntary contractions in the genital. For a woman, it's typically 9 to 12. Involuntary contractions in the genital. But that's achieved really by tensing up and letting go. Right. Now, what we found is that if you get to that orgasm line, that point where your genitals will involuntarily release, that level of sensitivity that Masters and Johnson's clinically defined, instead of tensing your way to it, if you get to that level of sensitivity while your body is relaxed, which is in a certain sense more difficult because it's kind of easy to build up the sensation with a lot of fast thrusting, but you're going to go up and down. Right. But if you get to that level of sensitivity in a relaxed way, then you stay above that line. And instead of, 9 to 12 involuntary contractions, you start to have 15 and 20 and 30. And then you can't even count it anymore. Then you're more measuring it in time. When we do a demonstration of extended orgasm, it's typically 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes long. We've done them up to 3 hours long, and it's much higher than a regular orgasm, obviously longer, but much, much higher. And people are like, but how could your body withstand that? Well, your body can withstand it because you're relaxed.
Right. Yeah, it's not as though you're like thrashing at your body trying to like it's this it that unfortunately that's how a lot of people would think is that when they talk about even, just the experience, you know, while there's a climax as they describe, like it's the as if it's that's the moment, excuse me, it's the everything that led to that moment that if you play it backwards, you realize all the other real moments that were experienced. And unfortunately, we trigger it as like literally the second that it ends, as if that was the climax. But the experience throughout it, if you can extend that, is where it's pretty fantastic, and not just sort of this, hey, there's nothing wrong with a good old fashioned animalistic, like let's just have a lot of fun really fast, but that can be part of a strong, sexual relationship. But to explore, yeah, just extending it, not rushing. Then when you do have a chance to maybe have it in less time or in a different situation, a different place, you've got that sort of, you know, muscle and soulful memory of how to achieve that.
Yes, and what it means for our relationships, it means a lot. So, first, I want to say something very specific so you and listeners know what we're talking about. The extended orgasm practice is a clitoral stroking practice, it's manual stimulation. Women can have extended orgasm in their bodies. Obviously, it's clitoral stroking practice. Men can also have it in their bodies. And it's a whole combination of course, releasing the mind and relaxing and feeling your sex center and using the technique. And it's very much the cornerstone of a relationship that gets better and better over time in terms of attraction and chemistry. So it's a really great skill to learn with yourself and your own body. As a single person, you're bringing that into relationship. But if you're in one, a lot of couples come to us because the vibe isn't what it used to be. It's become all about the logistics and having this sensual practice. I mean, we mentioned this couple a while ago in this conversation with you. And, they were trying to make a baby and they were, he was busy with all these hours at his tech job and sex was sort of becoming this stressful thing and they wanted their sex life back. And I will never forget the look on both of their faces. They came into our sensuality expansion program, which is our extended orgasm intensive, where you learn this stroking practice at expert level. You get to see us demonstrating it a bunch of times. We verbally coach you. And she sat up, after them practicing and us coaching them verbally, and her face was like fireworks. She was like, oh my God, we have the best sex life ever. And all of the old stuff was just out the window when they were there, connected, turned on to each other. And every couple can have that. It's our body's natural state, really.
And I guess the important thing, if we look at, where it all comes together, it's so much of it's mind, body, soul, practices, attention, focus. It's like it's a continually moving machine of life. And so for folks that really want to explore themselves, and it's never a one and done. Like I said, like you can have that beautiful moment where you're like, good, this is amazing. There's nothing to say that they don't maybe need to revisit and remind themselves in a couple of years or a decade that, all right, let's kind of recapture that moment again. And I think we can do it. It's hard for us to, I think it's very hard to personally acknowledge that we are not what we were before. And it's even more difficult to acknowledge that we are not what we were before for each other.
And that's why, we have coaches for every key part of our life, yoga and this and that and all the rest of it. And that's why we do what we do, so we can be that leverage point for people when people are willing to tell that truth that you just told, Eric, that, okay, hey, you get support. You want to learn anything? The best way to learn anything is find somebody who knows how to do that and have them teach you.
Yeah, you want to say that to people are like, you've got a running coach, you've got a cooking coach. Guess what? There's a big chunk of your relationship which is not getting the coaching attention that it really truly deserves. And like I said, I think even if people, just if they think about it, even if they're not necessarily coming to you directly, it's like if they, at least if they're having the introspective thought, they're one step closer to hopefully doing something that can help themselves and help their partner, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I could spend all day exploring much more about this. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time with us today. Erwan, Alicia, if folks want to get a hold of you, of course, I'll have the link to the website below. What's the best way if they want to engage with you? I know you've got an Instagram presence. You've obviously got the website. Your coaching practice is virtual as well. So it's not requiring that you're in the Bay Area or whatever, which is often, sometimes used to be a limit, I suppose. Actually, if you don't mind, before we jump in, did 18 months ago, things really changed for your practice, I imagine. How did you find that adaptation to a new way of connecting with people?
Oh, it was great. It was so exciting. We were already transitioning into some online teaching with our classes and our private coaching. And then when the pandemic hit, it just kind of pushed us over the edge to complete the process. So it's been amazing. We're working with people from all over the world in our group classes and coaching, and we're loving it.
Australia is really big for some reason, I guess, because they speak English.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But and that's it. And that, I think, if anybody takes something out of the most terrible thing that we've experienced in our generation or across many generations, it's like there's amazing things that we've gotten out of this. And that is, if we can get back to some of what we had before, but maintain this, like we can connect with anybody from the world. We don't have to be limited by our physical location. We don't have to be limited by, so many things, that held us back, or that we thought held us back before. Now we've kind of been forced into a new way of doing things, but there are fantastic things amongst that I hope that we kind of carry forward as we figure out, what the next level of normalcy looks like anyways.
Yeah. So for those of everybody listening, for those of you who are interested in learning more about working with Erwan and me, I'm offering a free love life consultation for anybody who wants to learn more. And the way that you can set that up with me is to text me. My number is 415-308-9580. It's our Erwan Devon Teachings business line, 415-308-9580. So maybe you're single and you want to learn how to land your soulmate and develop the relationship, or you're in a relationship, you want to bring more juice and intimacy to the situation. During the consultation, we'll get personal. You can share with me challenges, goals, desires. I'll work with you a little bit, and we'll look through all of our different programs, and I'll make a suggestion as to which one would be the best. We have group online classes, Mastery of Relationships, our most popular class, private coaching, sensual training, all sorts of fun stuff. And then, Eric, I'll also give you a link that people can click to set the session up. And our website is pleasurecourse.com.
Very cool. Well, Erwan, Alicia, thank you. I hope that people, take the moment to dial the number, text the number, visit the website, and explore, what's potential. We've got so much amazing stuff inside us, and let's recapture it, rediscover, and we can all celebrate a couple of decades where we can't stop looking at the person we're
Right. Yeah, this has been very fun,
Really
Eric.
fun.
Yeah, we really enjoyed talking to you.
Excellent.